This morning we come to this fifth of the Ten Commandments, and it is the commandment that says to honor your father and your mother. To honor your father and your mother. So over the last couple of weeks, I looking around at social trends and things that are happening within our family circumstances and in our community circumstances, and I ran across this 184-page report from youth.gov. I did not even realize that we had a branch of our government focused on issues that are facing youth in America, and it's called youth.gov. And so they issued a report, and the report was on this question: with the rise of technology use among teenagers, what are the impacts of that technology use on bullying, especially bullying, dating relationships, and bullying with electronic devices? And so they put together a 184-page study. That's often what government does. It's very interesting to read. But it came up with some conclusions. And so here's a couple I want to share with you as we think through the connection between this and maybe our fifth of the Ten Commandments. So I'm going to share with you just two of their conclusions, but this is how they begin their conclusion. Technology use, such as social networking, cell phone, and smartphone use, is an integral part of teens' lives and something that will evolve and change, but will not cease to exist. Such technology has developed new ways for youth to be in contact with one another, creating both opportunity and risk. Based on this study's results, cyber dating, abuse, and cyberbullying are common experiences for youth. And given the nature of the technology, youth who are victims of such abuse are vulnerable to it any time of day or night. People no longer have to actually be together in the same room to fall victim to perpetuate various forms of dating abuse and bullying. Focusing on such cyber abuse, we draw 7 general conclusions from the study, and I'm not going to share all 7 with you, but I do want to share 2. The first conclusion is the rate of cyber abuse or cyberbullying, and they said it's substantial. Over 25% of youth in dating relationships report that they have been abused using technology by someone they are dating. So they're getting it over their phones and their social network. Just about 20% of youth reported being objects of cyberbullying outside of a dating relationship, and about 10% of youth report that they are the bullies themselves of attacks, and they do that through the use of technology. So when I was in school, in a class of 25 to 30 people, there were people that were bullied. And they were bullied while they're at school, and there's 1 or 2 of them. Now, that bullying doesn't only take place at schools, but through the use of technology, through our cell phones, because we're able to be a little bit more anonymous, that the incidence of bullying seems to have risen, and now it can track people day and night, because they don't always have to be in the same room in order to have bullying foisted upon them. So there are other conclusions that they draw, but here's the last one. Few victims of violence and abuse seek help. Less than 10% of those who are subjected to dating violence or abuse, less than 20% of those that are subject to bullying outside of dating relationships ever seek any sort of help. So we have this large contingent of these relationships that are going on, and again, thinking about teenagers, though I'm sure if we went up into the older bracket, that still continues to go on. And so we ask this question: what does the fifth of the Ten Commandments have to do with this phenomenon? So just consider for a moment where we've come from. We've been doing this study on the Ten Commandments now for a few weeks, and the angle we're taking at it is that the commandments are not just about setting laws for society, some kind of legalistic standards to live by so we know who's done right and who's done wrong by putting in a standard, but rather the Ten Commandments in their intention are to create a community of people that live in relationship with one another and live in relationship with God in order to demonstrate God's goodness and God's purposes to the world. The commandments are really about creating community together. And so we looked at the first commandment, which is, you should have no other gods before me, and suggested that if God's putting this people together, the Israelites, and they are to reflect His glory, the first thing that they need to know is that they cannot reflect His glory, and God cannot bring them together as a people of His blessing if they put any other loyalty above their loyalty to God. And so you have the commandment, no other gods before Him. Even if the nations around him make them a deal they can't refuse. Even if they offer them protection against the mighty empires that surround them, they can't take that offer if it's going to allow them to substitute their loyalty to God for any other loyalty. We talked about the second commandment, that there's to be no images or idols in the community of Israel. Not just, again, other gods to worship, but they're not to have an image that they can say, well, this is the God of Israel, so that somehow they could manipulate that. They're to be a community that doesn't have images, so that they are always listening and looking for the work of God, not trying to confine that into an image that seems to represent God. They're not to misuse His name as a way of abusing other people by invoking God into conversations and making promises based on God's name that they probably don't intend to fulfill anyway. It's not a way, God is not to be a bargaining chip for them. And so here we come to this fifth commandment. Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord God has commanded you, that your days may be long, that it may go well with you in the land that your Lord your God is giving you. So how does that commandment, again thinking through this commandment in our theme, commandments create community, how does this commandment help create a community, a unique community for the people of Israel? So I think if you consider not just the first commandment, honor your father and your mother, but you look at the second part of the verse, that gives us a clue to how this commandment was to function to create community. That your days may be long, and that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So notice where the onus is on this. The onus is on the people who have mothers and fathers. So again, that's not just children. That is all of us who happen to have living parents, that it is to honor them. And the promise is then directed towards those that do the honoring, that it may go well with you, and that your lives may belong in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So, if you imagine this, you have this group of older generation and the younger generation, the ones who are the children, whatever their age may be, they are asked to hold that older generation in honor. There's many times in the book of Deuteronomy, as the book of Deuteronomy paints this picture of God's people going into the promised land, that the parents and the grandparents are supposed to teach their children, again, of any age. But over and over, this commandment is given, remind your children and your children's children of these things. Pass these things on to your children and your children's children. The parents, the elders in the community, were to be the ones that reminded the younger generations of all the things that God did and all the things that God commanded and all the things that God can do for them if they are the community of God. But in the Ten Commandments, the focus is on the younger generation itself, that you are to honor your fathers and your mothers. These people that are teaching you, that are going to show you these things that they have learned over many years of experience, the things that I've passed down to them, they're going to begin to give those things into your life and help you make application and help you along the path, but only if you're able to honor your father and your mother. Now, a couple of things about that word honor. Honor it's a picture word. At least I like to think of it as a picture. I wish I had time to build one, but I didn't. So I want you to imagine a balance beam here. Let's pretend I'm a balance beam. So you know how balance beams work? If you want to weigh something, you put a standard weight on one side, and then you put the other thing on the other side, whatever it is. And if you know this side over here is 10 pounds, when this side over here weighs 10 pounds, that beam will be balanced. It's a balance beam. What the word honor means, it has to do with weight. To consider something to be weighty or heavy or to have value or worth. And so to honor mothers and fathers is not simply the word obedience. It's not obey mothers and fathers, because even when I became married and I had my own family responsibilities, I mean, if mom and dad said, "I want you to do this," I had to kind of find my own path through by that time. I had taken on responsibilities and I was responsible to other people. It's no longer a matter of obeying everything that they say, but in that balance of life, as I face these decisions that I have to face, that what their experience should weigh heavy for me. That the things that they've gone through and experienced for themselves, that should weigh heavy for me. not just my own experiences, but theirs. And their parental advice and their encouragement, that's a heavy weight in that balance. And so I follow that unless I have something that I've run across, not just my own whims, but something that is more important or more weighs heavier, then I can go a different path. But I should really consider and honor what my mother and father are able to provide and to teach for me. At the same time, part of my honoring is to care for them when their things are not always easy, as even in the ancient Israelites, older age meant health difficulties and meant all sorts of different changes in life. And part of that honoring was for the younger generation to provide for the older generation. And so you have this symbiotic relationship all throughout the book of Deuteronomy. The older generation brings up the younger generation, they pour into them, they teach them God's covenant and God's ways so that they can live well in the land, and the younger generation honors them. They weigh what they say, they take it seriously, and they also provide that care for that older generation. That symbiotic relationship helps to create community. Now, when you get into the New Testament and to the era that comes in the time of Jesus, you find that this commandment actually does not appear very often in the New Testament. It appears 6 times in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 2 different accounts that all 3 of them share about one time when the Israelites were not following the commandment and Jesus has to correct them, and another time where Jesus is speaking to a rich young ruler about what he has to do to have eternal life, and he points to obey the commandments, and he includes honoring mother and father in that list. So there's not a lot of specific teaching to the Christian community about the ongoing efficacy of this commandment. But when you get to the New Testament, the other writings, especially Paul and his writings to the Gentile community, he has a couple of things to say, advice and exhortation to give to the community that very much mirror this honor your father and mother commandment. One of them, he says, in the letter to Ephesians, is he tells the children to obey their parents. And then he goes on and says, remember that it says, honor your father and your mother, so that things may go well with you. And so if you look at that list of Paul, when he talks about children obeying their parents, he actually has a whole list of relationships that take place in families. Husbands and wives, wives and husbands, children and parents, parents and children, slaves and masters, masters and slaves. Kind of addresses all of those, and he says all of them come under this umbrella of make sure that you are submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. You want to demonstrate Christ in your relationships. And so children, that means, again, looking to your parents for their wisdom. Parents, that means not being cruel or harsh or overbearing on your children. Wives and husbands also have a place to fill in all of that. And Paul seems to be suggesting that God is continuing to work through this family unit. That the family units are a place where God, when they work well, when you have believing families, they're a place where God's will and God's understanding and His teaching can continue. And so those relationships should be kept as healthy as possible. And so he gives, in accordance with that, these commandments. He also addresses communities, not just family units, but in 1 and 2 Timothy and also in Titus, he begins to talk about the relationship between generations, that the older generation should help train up the younger generation, and the younger generation should respect and listen to the older generation. Have these, again, this creating a community, but now it's in the Christian community where all generations live in harmony together. Okay, so we've gotten through. Normally we do this, remember, we do, what did it mean for ancient Israel? What does it mean for Christians? And then it comes down to, what does it mean for First Baptist Church? What does it mean for us to honor our fathers and our mothers? How does this commandment continue to make its application in our life of faith together? Well, here's an interesting thing about life in the church. And this is not just in First Baptist Church. This is in most churches. That we are put together in our programming like a factory. You know how factories work? They have different process lines. You have a number of different processes to put parts together. And the way that churches have operated for a number of years is almost like the school model, which again, our model of school developed out of 19th century England, the Industrial Revolution. It's all about efficiency. So what's the most efficient way to educate people? Well, you put them together with people that are the same age, that are probably going through the same thing, and you teach them together. So imagine what happens when people come into First Baptist Church. What do we automatically do when they come in the door? We separate them according to age. Children go to children's Sunday school. The youth go to youth Sunday school. The adults go to the young adult Sunday school, and then we have an older adult Sunday school, maybe. And this is not just First Baptist Church. This is almost every Sunday school in America. We separate them by ages. We come to family dinner, and we have a room where generally the adults sit. And if you watch how we arrange ourselves, the senior group sits at one table, middle-aged adults sit at another table, the youth go off to a different room altogether. And there's value in that. Don't let me disparage that, but there's great value in that. Because youth are able to know what youth are going through. It helps conversations. But when do we ever bring folks together? When do we bring together to have meaningful conversations? You're all together here. This is not a meaningful conversation. This is a monologue by the pastor. But when do we bring people together to converse? One of the great things we did this summer is have a campfire on the lawn. And there were all generations all sitting around. Now, sometimes the children played with the children, the youth did things with the youth, the adults, they talked together. But when we were getting s'mores together, we were all there together. Those kind of connections and being able to share in one another's life, that should be what the church portrays to the world. That here are generations coming together and sharing in life together, support together, love together. And if there's a message that we want to share to a world desperately in need, that we live life together. And if we're to do that, relatively young man still, I need to listen to my elders. Because those that are older than me have an awful lot to teach me. And I try to learn. Don sometimes tries to tell me things, and I try to listen the best I can. But I learn from that wisdom. And maybe those that are younger than me, I have something to be able to share. But in order to do that, those of us that are in the younger category, we have to be able to respect those that are in the older. The onus is really on us to make the steps. As it was in honor your father and mother commandment, the onus is on me to engage myself with those that are my elders, not their responsibility to engage with me, because the commandment is really formed that way. The responsibility is the younger to engage with the older. And if we did that, and we did that in a meaningful way, and those that were elder, had experience, were willing to share that in a way that was gentle and encouraging and being able to come together and inviting, what a powerful witness we would have to the world around us. And this commandment, honoring your father and mother, or Paul's New Testament teaching about those that are the younger women look up to the older women invest in the younger women, younger men look up to the older men invest in the younger men. That would have its effect in bringing healing and health and generational unity to a world so desperately in need. That's my challenge. How can we continue to engage in meaningful, intergenerational relationship together in a way that allows each group to be able to learn and support and encourage one another? One final story. A couple of weeks ago, or I guess a week ago it was, a group of Bluefield college students, first-year students, I had the opportunity to take them over to the Maples, and we shared together. And just a few moments visiting some seniors, playing bingo with them. Some of them went room to room, saw Pat Tucker, was able to introduce some of the students to Pat Tucker, who's there at the Maples. Came in to see one woman's room and said, how are you doing? Did some of the students come in to visit you? And she looked at me and said, yep. They made my day. They made my day. And then she continued to talk, and she gave some really powerful advice to these young men. Most of them are football players coming in. These young football players, she gave some pretty powerful advice to them. They made her day, and she was able to share some of her wisdom with them. And it was a powerful experience, one that should not be unique in the church. It should be commonplace. And my prayer is that it will be for us.